The kids were all
Kim, you're good, Kim? All right.
And base runners, they were base
Hi, everyone. In a moment, I will officially call this meeting to order because we have Kim in the booth ready to roll for BevCam. Thank you. This meeting is largely for members of the public to give us some input, although we do have a couple more items for Mr. Ailes to cover with us. So with that being said, I'll call to order this special City Council meeting Tuesday, June 21st, 2022, 7 o'clock p.m. Ms. Dixon, would you please call the roll?
Sure. Councillor Bowen?
Here.
Crowley?
Here.
Feldman?
Here.
Hausman?
Here.
Rand?
Here.
Rotundo?
Here.
St. Hilaire?
Here.
Sweeney?
Here.
And Flowers.
Here. Thank you, Ms. Dixon. Councillor Hausman, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Councillor Hausman. Before we jump into having members of the public who have signed up speak, I want to mention for members of the public who are just arriving or maybe watching on BevCam and planning to come on over to City Hall, you can sign up to speak in this public hearing on the piece of paper that's on the desk in front of Ms. Dixon and me, and we will then be just calling speakers in order, and you can come up at any point to be able to sign up. This public hearing on the city budget is sort of a culminating moment leading to a final vote by the City Council next week on the budget that follows a month nearly of Finance and Property Committee of the Whole meetings to go through portions of the budget department by department. Some of you may have been following on BevCam. I know there's many local government fans here in the room with us. But I do know there's a few items, councillors, in the budget book that Mr. Ailes did not get to just touch on with us. And so I'd like to invite Mr. Ailes to the podium before we go to the public, just so that the public can also have the benefit of hearing these last pieces. Mr. Ailes, I have the list that Finance and Property Chair Councillor Hausman sent, but I assume you have those pages in front of you as well?
Yeah, I believe if you flip to the other section of your book, it's all of the sections contained in that area.
Thank you. So that looks like it's starting on page 118, debt service. Is that correct, Mr. Ailes?
It's 118.
Thank you. So as Mr. Ailes said, councillors, this is under the tab marked Other, and we'll be picking up at page 118, Debt Service, and just Mr. Ailes will walk us through these remaining sections, and then we will go to members of the public as quickly as we can out of respect for their time. Mr. Ailes, please.
Okay, thank you, Madam President. Councilors, these sections of the budget really don't fall within a particular department. Most of them are managed either within my department, the Treasury function of the city, and HR does have some role in some of the other areas we're going to cover, like healthcare and unemployment comp and some payroll tax. Things of that nature.
Mr. Ailes, I'm really sorry. I just realized as a point of order, I should have actually formally opened the public hearing. So I'm going to formally open the public hearing posted for tonight on Order 156, the FY23 budget. I apologize, Mr. Ailes. Now you're speaking within the confines of the public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you. So as we look at the first section here, the debt service for the city is comprised of 4 different sections. One is a long-term principal payment. One is a long-term interest payment. Those combined equate to what the city's obligation is for existing debt. And these are projects that the city, in most cases, has already done. And now we're effectively just paying the mortgage on whatever it was that we bought. And in addition to that, there are 2 areas of short-term debt and short-term interest that from time to time may be budgeted as well. Those are for things that may arise mid-year, whether it's related to a capital project that we may need to round out before going to bond, or whether there's some pay down of an existing loan authorization we may look to do. The short-term interest component, which we do not have any budgeted for this fiscal year in FY23, has to do with when we are borrowing money short-term in anticipation of completing a capital project. It's almost like an equity loan on your house. You borrow it short-term, 3, 6, or 9 months, or even 12 months in some cases, until you can wrap up enough projects that would constitute a full borrowing, which is actually releasing municipal bonds onto the SEC, and they get publicly traded. So without further explanation, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. These numbers do line up with what you all have seen on the capital expenditure report in terms of FY23. The only other piece I would add in terms of context, we're looking at just FY23, but it's important to refer to the capital expenditure plans because it's important to understand that how in this particular year, FY23, there is a dip in our debt service, and we expect that to rebound back to levels of FY22 and possibly even a little bit beyond as we bring on additional capital projects. So this is a short-term kind of reduction in this debt budget, which frankly has allowed us to put the additional monies into roads and sidewalks that we're looking to do this year, as well as some other areas of the budget that we're looking to spend some additional funds on. We'll be looking to pull some of those back next year in the FY24 budget back into the debt budget.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ailes. Councilors, if there are questions on the debt service section, we'll take those. Councilor Houseman.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Ailes. Could you just give us some of the highlights of what constitutes the bulk of the long-term principal indebtedness?
Sure. Happy to. When you compare to FY22, you see that there's about a $2.1 million drop year over year in budget for long-term principal and long-term interest. Those are the result of a drainage project, Centerville School, North Beverly School construction projects falling off, right? So we've paid the entirety of those projects and we no longer have a debt payment associated with them. In addition to that, the way we prefer to structure our debt is in a declining principal way, which ultimately makes the debt payments less costly to the taxpayer. But it kind of front loads some of the costs to get the principal down over time. And so every year you see precipitation in the annual debt payments that you might have for a particular project. It kind of slides down like that. And what that allows us to do is as they slide down, we're able to layer in additional capital improvement projects to keep pace with infrastructure needs throughout the city in a way that doesn't overly burden the budget in a particular year. The projects that are contained in the FY23 numbers have to do with construction at the farm library, fire equipment, and keep in mind, these can go back as far as 25, 30 years ago. Some of this debt can be related to. There was some work done on the carriage house, some drainage projects. We laid a fiber loop in the city about 10 years ago. There's some debt for that. Parking lot construction in the downtown area, those lots that have granite curbing and you probably know them. It's not the Dollar lot, it's the other city-owned lots. Some of the larger pieces have to do with the construction of the Beverly High School, and then the middle school and the police station, as well as some library repairs and facade work on this building that we're in right now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilors, any other questions for Mr. Ailes on debt service? Councilor Bowen.
Thank you. I just had a quick question on the short-term interest. Thank you for the explanation on context. And I was just curious what the 25,000 still anticipated for this year might be if there are projects that are rolling right now.
Yeah, so those, when we built it last year, those are built in advance of interest payments being due for short-term borrowings. We are clear this year, so whatever's left in that budget will revert back to the general fund. We've made our last debt payment this year. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. All right, seeing no other questions on debt service, Mr. Ailes, let's go to annuities and pensions, please, which is page 122 for the council in the book.
Annuities and pension, these relate to our two largest liabilities that the city has, other than, ongoing infrastructure costs. This has to do with the city's long-term pension liability, as well as the long-term liability associated with current employees and retirees' health care. And these obligations are governed by Mass General Law, so we're required as a municipality to provide certain levels of compensation to retirees, as well as certain options for health care for retirees. So these long-term liabilities get evaluated, or valued, I should say, every 2 years by PERAC, which is the state oversight agency on retirement systems, and they come up with a number that is our long-term liability or outstanding liability. And we're required as a municipality, when it comes to pension liability, to pay that down by the year 2040. Okay, so we're on target now to pay that down by the year 2033, and the schedule we are on requires a 4.5% increase annually in the total amount that gets contributed to that pension fund. Keep in mind, we share that pension fund with the Beverly Housing Authority, so the proportion may not equate exactly to a 4.5% because it gets split between the two entities, but overall, it is a 4.5% increase each year. FY23, that contribution in total with the Beverly Housing Authority included is about $13.1 million, of which the city of Beverly and its taxpayers will be responsible for $12.5 million of that. The second liability has to do with, we call it OPEB liability, which stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits, and that is effectively health care for all of our existing employees, all of the retired city employees, all of the retired teachers, which is different than the pension because we don't handle the teacher's pension, but we do handle their health care once they retire. And so collectively, that represents close to a $400 million liability. And so this is, the line you see here is an effort to begin to pay into a trust fund that will accumulate over time in investment vehicles and help to alleviate some of that burden in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Ailes. Counselors, any questions on page 122? Counselor Bowen.
Thank you. Also a quick one, I think, which is just, where do we see the free cash transfers that go towards also paying down that liability show up? Does that appear someplace else, or?
Yeah, they would show up in the earlier section of the budget where we have transfers out to other funds. We went over this because everyone tends to look at that and think it's just roads and sidewalks. But when the city council appropriates additional money to be transferred to these at the certification of free cash every year, it goes to that front part of the budget because it's an accounting mechanical reason.
Thank you, Counselor Bowen. Any other counselors with questions on page 122? Thank you. Let's go to benefits administration then, please, which is page 123 and following.
So there's a few sections within this particular section of the budget. This deals with budgeting for workers' compensation, unemployment compensation, the health insurance costs, which represent the city's portion of employee and retiree premiums on the healthcare system, as well as life insurance and the payroll taxes that we as an employer are required to pay.
Thank you. Counselors, are there any questions on this section? Starting at page 123. Counselor Bowen.
Thank you. Sorry, I jotted down all these notes like weeks ago, so just excited to get to them now. I had a question on page 125. Under the health insurance, the last line is miscellaneous health insurance expenses and wellness initiatives. And I noticed it was low for 2022 and coming back up. But I was just curious if that was due to there being other sources of funding for wellness initiatives for city employees, because it seems like a year when we needed a lot of them, from mental health supports to COVID supports to anything.
That's a great question. I'd first draw your attention to the previous year's spending level, because that is a typical year. You would see it spent at this level. This past year, we hadn't spent to the level we have in previous years. Not that we're offering any less programming, it's that certain components of that did fall within the CARES funding. There were some health-related costs that the city incurred that were actually shifted over to that funding source. This line does cover things like We have a coordinator for any confidential outreach that an employee may have regarding personal issues or just someone to talk to about a particular issue, EAP, employee assistance programs. And we also do various types of incentives in and around our offices to try to incentivize certain types of healthy behavior and things of that nature.
Thank you, Counselor Bowen. Any other questions, counselors, in this section? Let's go then to state assessments, which I think is the last part of this other section, and then we will go to members of the public. So starting on page 128, actually, and only page 128.
So this is probably the easiest part of when we sit down to build the budget, because we get these numbers given to us from the Division of Local Services. They represent charges that come from other state agencies or partner groups that are regional, that the Division of Local Services actually intercepts the city's state aid and pays these bills on our behalf. But they relate to everything, as you can see there. They relate to mosquito control projects, air pollution projects. There is a charge for the MBTA, because we as a community where the MBTA comes through, we actually pay some assessments to them. And then a few of them have to do with costs associated with our students going out to other districts, whether that's for charter schools or they choice into another district. We get charged for those as well.
Thank you, Mr. Ailes. Counselor Houseman.
The assessments that are listed here, are these payments that the city makes after receiving state aid, or is this reflect a net number that is deducted from what the city would otherwise get for state aid?
So it effectively is a net number. So these get deducted out of our state aid and we receive the net. But from an accounting perspective, we receive the gross revenue and have an expenditure to offset it. So we book both sides of that equation.
So, for example, the assessment for the MBTA, which has been less than cooperative for us on the National Grid project, does not create any sort of bargaining leverage for us in any respect, even though it's a fairly good-sized number.
Yeah, we don't pay these bills directly. We couldn't withhold an invoice.
Yeah, okay.
If that's where you're going.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Counselor Houseman. Counselor Rotundo.
Mr. Ailes, just a school choice question. I see that's, 34.6% increase. Is that assessment for last year's assessment, and we're getting billed for this year, correct? So it's not as if for next year, the assessment could actually go down next year?
These numbers could and always do fluctuate from the time we collectively build the budget and set the budget to the time that DESE, Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, sets the enrollment numbers, knows who's going out and to what districts, and then so this number will get revised. Historically, over the last 2 to 3 years, it has risen from the time we've set the budget.
Madam President, just
Yes,
follow?
of course, thank
So
you.
we're seeing actually more people going out of the district than the last, each year it seems as the out of districts going up, is that correct?
The payment is going up. I can't speak for certain that that correlates to an increased enrollment. I'd need to check with the superintendent on numbers.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Counselor Rotundo. Counselors, any other questions on state assessments? All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ailes. Mr. Perry, our City Council Budget Analyst, is there anything that you'd like to add to our conversation before we move on to our members of the public?
Not really, Madam President. Keep it simple. Everything you said I agree with, and I'd say move on. I have nothing to add unless somebody has a question for me.
Thank you, Ms. Dixon. Counselors, any questions for Mr. Perry? All right, Mr. Perry, I guess you're free to sit back down. Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Dixon, for grabbing the list of our members of the public. Thank you. And thank you to members of the public who are watching on BevCam, have been watching this process, and especially to those of you who are here in the room. I always say when we have a public hearing, it's so important to have people here and add your voices. And I also know it's not time neutral for all of you to come and speak with us. And so thank you for that investment of time that you're putting into being here with us. The way that this works is we'll just go down the list of those who have signed up, and if someone is watching on BevCam and you're just on your way out the door, don't despair. You can still come and sign up. And so we're going to start with the first name on the list, which is Mr. Richard Tabbitt. And Mr. Tabbitt, I know that you know how this works, but if you would just begin with your name and address for the record.
My name is Richard Tabbitt. I live at 57 Sonning Road, Bellevue, Massachusetts. I have a couple of things I just want to talk about. I mean, recently there was a big white elephant in the room. It's the Bridge Street, the bridge being down. And I've been reading some of the comments online from some of the counselors, and they're saying they're asking the state to provide us money to alleviate the situation in Ryleside. My question is, in the next year's budget, what money is being allocated to alleviate the situation, bring more traffic officers online, because the traffic's awful right now. It's almost like Ryleside's been cut off from the rest of the city. And I just have a specific question, is what in this year's upcoming budgets can be done to alleviate that situation in Ryleside, and with the exception of, and what state aid do we expect to get from that? My second question is regarding the airport noise. I've been attending the airport noise meetings. I know that State Representative Sally Kern has done a noise study. I want to know what else the city's going to be doing for the residents that are affected by noise from the Beverly Airport. I know the FAA has regulation over that, but I'd like to see what is the city going to do when it comes to dollars to help alleviate the situation for the residents of North Beverly, the people living near the airport, and people all over the city. I was outside today, and I couldn't even talk to my wife. It was so loud, the planes flying overhead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tabbitt. Those are some excellent questions. And as you know, Mr. Tabbitt, from being at public hearings, it's not a back and forth. I know you're not expecting that, but I did want to mention, just for members of the public in general, because many of your questions are about the Hall-Whitaker Bridge, if people have not yet seen this, there is a community meeting that was just scheduled by the mayor's office and the city that will be happening Thursday. I almost said tomorrow, but I'm just lost in the week. Thursday at 6:30 p.m. at Beverly High School in the auditorium about the situation with the Hall-Whitaker Bridge specifically. So I mentioned that just because you raised some questions about it, and I'm sure many members of the community have questions. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Councillor Feldman, for directing me to Kim. As always, our faithful friends at BevCam will have that coverage. So if you can't be there, you can still follow along. The next speaker on our list is Mr. Rich Donlin. Rich, if you'd like to come to the podium, and just the same, if you would. I know I've given away your name, but if you would start with your name and address for the record, that would be great.
My name is Rich Donlin. I live at 9 Oakmont Road, and as the fates would have it, 43 years ago today was the first time I was able to say that. My wife and I moved onto Oakmont Road 43 years ago today. That is part of my life story. Another part is the fact that I'm proud to say that I've been a part of this city for 80 years. And I'm here. Before I begin my plea, I'd like to sincerely thank all of you for your public service. I do participate in politics, and I know it ain't easy. So I think it was Aristotle, I believe it was Aristotle, who said that public service is the noblest endeavor of mankind, and I sincerely believe that. So now for the plea. As mentioned previously, I live at 9 Oakmont Road, and my plea is that attention be given to the abominable conditions of that road, and also another adjoining road, Putnam Street. The reality is that Oakmont Road is the only access to North Beverly Elementary School in the morning. It's an artery for the buses, for the children walking, and the parents taking their children to school there. My wife and I are retired, and that is fortuitous because we're able to, and gladly arrange our schedules so that we don't begin any activities from 7:15 in the morning until 8 o'clock in the morning, because that's when the street is used for the access to to North Beverly Elementary. We do this willingly, happily. I spent 9 years in a classroom myself, and my wife spent 31 years in the classroom. And just as an aside, I find it interesting that it took her 26 years to get out of the first grade, but she did it. I understand that the request for streets and sidewalks, I think I was probably 5 or 6 years old when my parents were asking for the sidewalks to be repaired. I understand the demands, I don't understand the cost the way Brian would, but I know that it's a just huge outlay. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me to leave a street that is so important to our children, to our teachers, to our bus drivers. To leave a street, these two streets, in such disrepair. So I understand that also the city is receiving additional funds for paving this year. And although I'm not too tuned into Brian's expertise with finance, we are getting some infrastructure help from the federal government. I don't know how that plays into it. I'm hoping it plays into it positively, and I hope that my final line here is, I hope serious attention will be given to this matter, and I very much appreciate your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Donlin.
Does anybody have any questions for me? Oh, I love to take questions.
I was going to say, I know you do. I know you do. And I think
I will say one thing. I did just forward you an email because we have talked about this extensively, and I know the issues. And so we will keep pressing for Putnam and Oakmont. So you're welcome.
Thank you, Kathleen. That is in your ward, Ward 5.
Yes, it is.
And Mr. Donlin, I feel like most of us also know how to get you. So if we have questions, we can be in conversation back and forth. But thank you to you and to Gail for your years as public teachers as well. I know you alluded to that, but it's very, very much appreciated. We do have a third public speaker signed up, Danielle Spang. If you would like to come to the podium, and same thing, begin with your name and address for the record, and then it's your chance to address the council.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Danielle Spang, and I live at 16 Mulberry Street in Beverly. Sorry, my voice is still coming back. I wanted to first thank Mayor Cahill and his staff, especially the health and engineering departments, as well as the city council, and everyone who's been helping to work together on rodent control and integrated pest management. I was very encouraged to see the money allocated for that in the proposed budget, and look forward to learning more about what the program will cover. I also wanted to come to speak to publicly support the school system. We're excited to see the money towards an elementary school librarian, and as well as having the composting programs returned to the schools. I know they funded an amount of money towards that. I understand that the city is receiving more Chapter 70 funds towards the schools, and I just wanted to ensure that the city continues to prioritize our schools through the city's contribution to the school budget as well, and that it doesn't turn into Chapter 70 means that we give less. I know that didn't happen this year, and I'm glad for that. I'd like to see us compensate our teachers, administrators, aides, and all employees well. I think our community will benefit from making sure that they're well compensated. I also found it very helpful to understand the proposed school budget, the way that they laid out goals that were measurable, and they could monitor and see in the past what was achieved in their budget towards those goals. I'd love to see something like that on the city side as well. I understand the city budget is massive and covers many more things than the school budget, but even if there could be a portion of that where goals are set and achievements are marked, I think that would be helpful for people to understand the broad scope of the budget. One other small ask I have is that when the PDF for the budget goes up on the internet, it could be searchable. That would help too. So those are my thoughts, and thank you. I know that everyone puts a lot of time into it, and we appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Ms. Spang, and thank you for being here and for following along with the budget process with us as well. Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak? I want to presume that Mr. Ailes is not also a member of the public. All right. Well, thank you again to the members of the public who are here with us. It's really important to have your feedback, your questions. I saw counselors taking notes. We heard some follow-up from Counselor Feldman, so this really does factor into, I know, counselors' assessments and weighing of things. Counselors, the next step in our process is to return to Finance and Property, and that subcommittee will be working on a vote to return this to the full council. Counselor Houseman, you're the chair. Do you want to say anything briefly about tomorrow's meeting or the next step?
Yeah, just briefly, we meet tomorrow night, 6:30 here, council chambers. We have a fairly, I guess I would say, abbreviated process in terms of the voting. Unless something comes up in subcommittee, likely the entire budget as it's been presented will likely be returned back to the full council. And discussion such as there may be is most likely going to take place at that level. So tomorrow night, I expect will be a fairly straightforward meeting. If it goes past 7 o'clock, we may have a conflict with the Zoning Board of Appeals, but I think we may be done by that point. If not, we will return, or we'll move over to the conference room next door to continue the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Houseman. So that meeting tomorrow, Finance and Property Committee of the Whole, is 6:30 p.m. here. And as Councilor Houseman said, then the final vote of the full council will happen next week on the 28th on the budget. Following our regular meeting, which will happen on the 27th here in this room, which has no shortage of other activities, but the budget will be the following night. Well, actually, I'll take a motion to adjourn our public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We'll close the public hearing on order number 156. That's the proposed FY23 budget, and that will stay with the Subcommittee on Finance and Property / Committee of the Whole. Councilors, any final thoughts or announcements before I take a motion to adjourn our meeting tonight? Councilor Bowen.
I might just share, I had mentioned only earlier today to our budget and management analyst and finance director that as we get this input and then move back to sort of the big picture and the vote, had been playing around with just some ways to present the numbers. As was pointed out in the public hearing, sometimes they can be hard for people to decipher online. So hoped I might share some of that material ahead of the meeting through the clerk's office, just as sort of a visual, and may run that for the numbers themselves by Mr. Perry before doing so a second time. But just wanted to flag that as something I would like us to get into the habit of doing as a council and as a city, and so took a crack at for myself this year, and I'm happy to share, but just wanted to sort of surface that as an opportunity.
Thank you very much, Councilor Bowen, and thank you for raising it in the public meeting forum, so it's before the whole council at the same time. That's a thought that you've had, and obviously, as you said, has come up in the public hearing and has been something that the council has talked about in prior years. And Mr. Ailes, I know we've talked with you about hopes for with an expanded finance department, that is the goal that we're striving towards together as a city. So thank you, Councilor Bowen. Any other final thoughts or announcements? All right, well, with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. We are adjourned. Friends, this might be a record for this term.
No.